My name is Emma. Back in 2018, the year I thought life was finally opening its doors to me, I walked into a courthouse wearing borrowed heels and a dress I bought on clearance. I said, "I do," to a man who would later teach me that love and illusion can look identical from a distance. His name was Daniel. And Daniel came from money. Not regular money, old money. The kind where problems are solved with private phone numbers, and consequences never really touch you. He grew up in a world where mistakes were forgiven before they were even made. A world where someone always arrived to clean up the mess. I grew up in the opposite place. Dim apartments with flickering lights. Thin walls. Winter nights where the heater rattled like it was dying. Kitchen counters with coupons taped to the fridge. Meals stretched thin so everyone could eat just enough. I learned early that survival wasn't a dramatic word. It was a daily routine. You wake up, you work, you hope your shoes last another month. Maybe that's why Daniel looked at me the way he did the night we met, like I was a novelty he had never encountered before. I was a server at his uncle's restaurant. He walked in wearing a soft gray sweater, the kind that whispered designer in every stitch. He smiled like life had never denied him anything. And in that moment, I believed he was charming. He left a large tip and a small wink. Both stayed with me longer than they should have. I didn't know then how dangerous it is to mistake attention for affection, to mistake confidence for character. In the beginning, everything he did felt generous. Flowers at work. Dinners where I had to Google half the menu. Drives through neighborhoods where every house looked like a magazine cover. He made me feel chosen, something I had never experienced in a world where nothing came easy. But attention isn't love. Sometimes it's the first step of ownership. After the wedding, the changes arrived quietly. He'd tilt his head when I mispronounced something. Correct me softly, like I was a child learning how to behave. He'd smirk when I didn't recognize a brand name. Roll his eyes when I didn't understand a reference. "You're just from a different world," he'd say. Sometimes with kindness. Sometimes with a strange, cutting pride. And slowly, I began to feel smaller in a house that suddenly felt too large. Then came the week that cracked everything open. His sister, Fiona, and her boyfriend, Chase, flew in for a visit. We picked them up from the airport. And the moment she saw me before she even hugged Daniel, she clapped her hands together and squealed, "Oh my God, she's totally Jordan's." Chase laughed. Daniel smirked. They all acted like it was some adorable inside joke I wasn't in on yet. "What's Jordan's?" I asked. Daniel slipped an arm around me, voice smooth as butter. "It means you have great style." I believed him. Because I wanted to. Because I didn't want to imagine the alternative. So, for the rest of the week, every time they said Jordan's, I smiled politely. I told myself it was affection. A nickname. A sign of acceptance. But acceptance shouldn't feel like confusion. It shouldn't feel like waiting for a punchline. The red flags started soft. Fiona's eyes scanning my clothes. Chase asking where I grew up, dragging the question out like he was poking at something dirty. Daniel encouraging them to talk about growing up wealthy, their country club childhood, as they proudly called it. They always glanced at me afterward, waiting to see how I reacted. There was one moment at dinner when Fiona looked at me and said, "People from humble backgrounds are so resilient." The smile she wore didn't match the message, but I swallowed it. Because swallowing pain was something I had learned early. Because reacting gives people like her satisfaction. 4 days into their visit, they opened 2 expensive wine bottles Daniel bought to impress them. I opened the one I liked, simple, cheap, sweet. Fiona wrinkled her nose. "That smells. Budget." Their laughter filled the room. Daniel laughed too louder than he needed to. Something inside me tightened. Not anger. Something colder. Something sharper. Later, drunk and loud, they played Truth or Dare. Fiona smirked, cheeks flushed, and said, "Daniel, tell Emma what Jordan's really means." The room held its breath. Daniel laughed. Then he looked at me. red-faced, sloppy, careless. And he said, "Jordan's is what we call homeless people who still have swag." Their laughter exploded. Ugly, harsh, cruel. It filled the room like smoke. Thick, toxic, suffocating. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break. But something inside me froze solid. People think betrayal erupts in fire. Mine formed quietly, in ice. The next morning, I confronted him. He denied it, lied, minimized it. It was just a joke. "You're too sensitive. You need to understand our humor." When I pushed, he finally admitted. "I told them about your background so they could be prepared." Prepared? He said it like I was the embarrassment. Like I was the inconvenience. Prepared for someone who grew up with bills instead of bank accounts. Prepared for someone who worked instead of inherited. The humiliation was a slow burn. But revenge was a cold calculation. For the next 2 days, I watched them. Their arrogance, the way they sat with their legs crossed just so. The way they talked like the world owed them respect simply because they existed. People like them think humiliation only travels downward, never up. Daniel had bought a very expensive bottle of tequila for their final night, the kind he bragged about, the kind he thought would impress them. The afternoon before the farewell dinner, they went on a long hike. I said I wasn't feeling well and stayed behind. The moment the front door closed, the house felt different. Quieter. Ready. I took out my phone, hit record, placed it on the counter. Then I lifted the fancy bottle, heavy, pale glass, gold label, and loosened the seal. I poured it into the sink. Every drop. Then I replaced it with cheap Sauza gold. A harsh, unrefined burn in a pretty bottle. As I poured, I spoke into the camera. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't sound angry. I talked about my childhood. About sharing blankets in winter. About laughing with my siblings even when life was grim. About how love mattered more than money. I said how grateful I was not to grow into the kind of people who used insults as entertainment. How privilege without empathy was just greed wearing a mask. How arrogance rotted a soul long before poverty ever could. Then I poured myself shots from the real tequila before replacing everything. Warmth bloomed in my chest. Not drunkenness. Validation. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next day, the performance began. They poured the cheap tequila into crystal glasses like it was liquid gold. Fiona swirled it dramatically. Chase sniffed it like a sommelier. Daniel looked proud, chest puffed, like he had handcrafted the bottle himself. Fiona sipped and sighed. You can taste the quality." Chase nodded. "Smooth, very smooth." Daniel beamed. I sat in silence, watching the irony unfold. Watching them praise bitterness disguised as luxury. Finally, when the moment felt right, I stood. Walked to the TV. Connected my phone. "I made something for you," I said. "Just a little thank you." The room shifted the moment the video started. Their faces changed slowly, at first confusion, discomfort, then suddenly, sharply. Realization hit them like a slap. They watched me pour out the real liquor. Watched me replace it with cheap tequila. Watched me speak about my childhood with quiet fury. Watched me call them exactly what they were. Then the video ended. Silence. Heavy. Embarrassed. Dead. I collected the shot glasses. Turned. Left the room without a word. That night, Daniel stormed into the bedroom, furious. "My sister is crying. You humiliated us." I looked at him calmly. "Yeah," I said. "Sucks, doesn't it?" He slept elsewhere. I slept peacefully. They left the next morning. No goodbyes. No hugs. Just fast, angry footsteps and a slammed door. Fiona never spoke to me again. Not a text. Not a message. Not a single word. Even months later, When we visited his parents overseas, she refused to come see us. Hiding behind shame is easier than facing truth. Eventually, I left Daniel too. The divorce papers felt like opening a window in a suffocating room. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. That tequila night wasn't just revenge. It was clarity. It was the moment I remembered who I was and who I refused to become. I grew up poor, but I grew up human. They grew up rich, but they grew up hollow. Walking away from that family wasn't just easy, it was necessary. And if life taught me anything, it's this. Money buys comfort. Money buys convenience. Money buys silence. But money will never buy character. Never buy empathy. Never buy the humanity they desperately lacked. I may have walked into their world quietly, but I walked out loudly, and with my dignity intact.